Now the news. A manhunt is underway in Halifax County. Authorities are looking for Jamzia Tillery.
Officers say he's accused of shooting and killing the mother of his child, Montasia Arrington. Just 2 weeks prior, Tillery was charged with stabbing her and then released on bond. In a story you'll only see on WRAL, Keenan Willard talks with Arrington's family and the judge who gave Tillery bond after the first assault.
At 7 a.m. on April 19, 2022, emergency dispatchers in Littleton, North Carolina, received a frantic call that would expose one of the most devastating failures in domestic violence protection. Gunshots had erupted at an apartment on Little Drive, shattering the morning quiet and leaving neighbors in terror. When police arrived at the scene, they discovered 20-year-old Montasia Renee Arrington lying motionless, her body riddled with bullets. Her mother, Teresa, had been shot in the hip while desperately trying to shield her daughter from the gunman. Most heartbreaking of all, Montasia's 1-year-old son, Jason, was present during the attack, witnessing the destruction of his family. Welcome back to Shadows of Crime, where we expose the darkest corners of human nature and the systems that fail to protect the innocent. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community as we seek justice for victims whose voices have been silenced. The man responsible for this massacre was Jamzia Tillery, Montasia's ex-boyfriend and the father of little Jason. But here's what makes this case absolutely infuriating. Just 2 weeks earlier, Tillery had been arrested for a vicious knife attack on Montasia. He had beaten her face until her eye swelled shut, then grabbed a kitchen knife and slashed her hands as she fought for her life. Montasia had begged the court to keep him locked up. She stood before a judge pleading for protection, warning that her life was in danger. She knew what Tillery was capable of because she had already survived his violence once. Yet somehow, despite her desperate pleas and despite Tillery's history as a registered sex offender, the system made a decision that would seal Montasia's fate. A decision so shocking that even the judge would later admit his regret. But what exactly happened in that courtroom? How did a man who had just tried to kill the mother of his child walk free in a matter of hours? And what warning signs did everyone miss that could have saved Montasia's life? The answers will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice in America. Montasia Renee Arrington was just 20 years old when her world revolved around one precious thing: her son Jason. Born and raised in Halifax County, North Carolina, Montasia was described by her grandmother Brenda Royster as having a gentle and caring nature that drew people to her. She was the kind of young woman who put family first, especially when it came to her baby boy. In early 2022, Montasia was living in the Fairfield Apartments complex in Roanoke Rapids, trying to build a stable life for herself and Jason. The toddler, barely 1 year old, was her everything. Every decision she made centered around creating a safe environment where he could grow and thrive. When circumstances required it, she moved in with her mother, Teresa Arrington, in Littleton, seeking the support and security that only family could provide. But Montasia's life was complicated by a relationship that had turned toxic. Jamzia Tillery, Jason's father, was 22 years old and carried baggage that would terrify any parent. In April 2017, when Tillery was just 16, he had been convicted of felonious restraint and sexual battery against a 14-year-old victim. The crimes occurred in January 2016, resulting in a 30-month probation sentence and mandatory registration as a sex offender for a minimum of 10 years. Despite this disturbing history, Montasia had once believed in the possibility of redemption. Like many young mothers, she hoped that fatherhood might change Tillery, that he could become the man their son deserved. By early 2022, however, their romantic relationship had crumbled. The couple was no longer together, though Montasia still allowed Tillery occasional visits to see Jason. This arrangement worried Montasia's family deeply. Her grandmother Brenda Royster had witnessed Tillery's possessive and jealous behavior firsthand. The family could see the warning signs that Montasia, perhaps blinded by hope for her son's sake, was trying to ignore. They watched nervously as she attempted to balance co-parenting with a man whose violent tendencies were becoming increasingly apparent. The dynamic between Montasia and Tillery was a powder keg waiting to explode. She was a devoted mother trying to do right by her child, while he was a registered sex offender whose jealousy and control issues were escalating. Montasia's attempts to maintain boundaries while allowing Tillery access to their son created a dangerous situation that her family feared would end badly. Their worst nightmares were about to become reality. April 2, 2022 started like any other day for Montasia. She was at her Roanoke Rapids apartment when Tillery arrived for what seemed like a routine visit with their son Jason. These visits had become part of their co-parenting arrangement, and despite her family's concerns, Montasia continued to allow them because she believed every child deserved a relationship with their father. What happened next would shatter that belief forever. During the visit, Tillery asked to use Montasia's phone to call his sister. It was a simple request that she granted without hesitation. But when Montasia later tried to retrieve her phone, something inside Tillery snapped. His jealousy and paranoia, which had been building for months, exploded into accusations that would change everything. Tillery accused Montasia of cheating on him. Despite the fact that they were no longer together as a couple, his possessive nature couldn't accept that she might have moved on with her life. The accusation hung in the air like a lit fuse. And what followed was a level of violence that would leave even seasoned police officers shaken. According to Officer N. Powell of the Roanoke Rapids Police Department, Tillery began beating Montasia in the face with his fists. These weren't the slaps of an angry ex-boyfriend. These were the calculated blows of someone intent on causing serious harm. Montasia's face swelled from the repeated impacts, and her eye was beaten so severely that it swelled completely shut. But Tillery wasn't finished. As Montasia reeled from the facial assault, he walked to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. The sight of the blade must have sent terror through her as she realized this wasn't just about jealousy anymore. This was about control, domination, and potentially her life. In the domestic violence protective order she would later file, Montasia described the horror in her own words. "Then he began punching me like a man and gets a kitchen knife." Those simple words carry the weight of absolute terror. A young mother, beaten and bloodied, watching her child's father transform into someone capable of murder. Tillery used the knife to cut Montasia's hands as she desperately tried to defend herself. The police report documented that he restrained her with the weapon for the purpose of doing seriously bodily harm. Every slice across her palms and fingers was evidence of her fight to survive, to get back to her son who needed his mother. In addition to the physical violence, Tillery destroyed Montasia's phone, causing $200 in damage and cutting off her ability to call for help. But somehow, through sheer determination and perhaps divine intervention, Montasia managed to escape the apartment and reach safety. She immediately called police, and Tillery fled the scene. But his freedom was short-lived. Roanoke Rapids police quickly apprehended him, and the evidence of his brutality was written across Montasia's battered face and slashed hands. The attack was over, but the real fight for Montasia's life was just beginning. Following the April 2nd attack, Tillery faced a mountain of serious charges. Assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, inflicting serious injury, assault on a female, communicating threats, kidnapping, and damage to property. Due to the domestic nature of the case, he was initially held without bond for 48 hours, giving Montasia a brief moment to breathe and plan her next steps. On April 4th, Montasia made what would be the most important court appearance of her life. Standing before the judge, still bearing the physical evidence of Tillery's violence, she made a desperate plea that should have saved her life. She specifically requested that Tillery be denied bond, telling the court that she feared for her safety. This wasn't a casual concern or an overreaction. This was a young mother who had looked into the eyes of someone capable of killing her and recognized the danger. But on April 5th, Judge W. Turner Stevenson made a decision that would haunt him forever. Despite Montasia's explicit fears and her request for protection, he set Tillery's bond at $40,000, with the condition that he have no contact with Montasia. The judge believed this amount would be sufficient to keep Tillery behind bars. He was catastrophically wrong. Tillery posted the required $4,000, just 10% of the bond amount, through Palmetto Surety Corporation. In a matter of hours, the man who had beaten Montasia's face beyond recognition and held a knife to her throat walked out of the detention center shortly before 5:45 p.m. that same day. The system had failed Montasia in the most fundamental way possible. When later questioned about this decision, Judge Stevenson would reveal the flawed thinking that cost Montasia her life.
Until an appearance before a judge.
He was really not charged with anything that he would have gotten no bond. We would have a jail with thousands of people in it if all the domestic cases stayed no bond.
Judge Stevenson said at the time he believed $40,000 was going to be enough to keep Tillery in jail.
I mean, in hindsight, sure, I would like to go back and he have no bond and still be in jail today, but I don't get the luxury of knowing what we know now when I'm setting a bond.
But Arrington's family says it was plain to see that Tillery posed a threat, and they feel the justice system failed her.
He was really not charged with anything that he would have gotten no bond. We would have a jail with thousands of people in it if all the domestic cases stayed no bond. The judge added that he believed $40,000 would keep Tillery locked up, admitting, in hindsight, sure, I would like to go back and he have no bond and still be in jail today, but I don't get the luxury of knowing what we know now when I'm setting a bond. But here's what's truly heartbreaking. The judge did have crucial information. He knew about Tillery's history as a registered sex offender. He knew about the knife attack. He knew Montasia was terrified, yet somehow none of that was enough. What are the domestic violence laws like in your state or country? Have you seen cases where victims' pleas for protection were ignored? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help other viewers recognize warning signs in their own community. Montasia's grandmother, Brenda Royster, captured the family's devastation perfectly. We were under the impression that he wasn't getting a bond and that he was going to be locked up. This mama had a baby. She's got a little boy that will never know his mom. She wanted somebody to protect her, and we couldn't protect her. We couldn't protect her, and then she went to the people that are supposed to do the protecting, and they couldn't protect her.
We wanted somebody to protect her, and we couldn't protect her. We couldn't protect her. And then she went to the people that are supposed to do the protecting, and they couldn't protect her.
With Tillery back on the streets, Montasia knew she had to take every precaution to protect herself and little Jay's son. She made the decision to leave her Roanoke Rapids apartment and move in with her mother, Teresa Arrington, in Littleton. It seemed like the smart choice. Having family around would provide an extra layer of security, and Teresa could help watch Jason while Montasia tried to rebuild her sense of safety. For those 2 weeks, Montasia attempted to create some normalcy in her life. She was surrounded by family who loved her, and the no-contact order gave her a legal shield that should have kept Tillery away. The days passed without incident, and perhaps Montasia began to believe that the worst was behind her. Maybe the court order would actually work. Maybe Tillery would respect the boundaries and stay away. This false sense of security is one of the most dangerous aspects of domestic violence cases. Victims often experience a brief calm period after legal intervention, leading them to believe they're finally safe. But for perpetrators like Tillery, this time isn't spent reflecting or moving on, it's spent planning. While Montasia was trying to heal from her physical and emotional wounds, Tillery was violating the very foundation of his release conditions. The no-contact order that was supposed to protect her meant nothing to him. He was watching, waiting, and preparing for what would become his final act of control over the woman who had dared to seek help. The court system had given Tillery exactly what he needed: freedom to move around, time to plan, and access to the tools he would use to ensure Montasia could never escape him again. Every day that passed brought him closer to a decision that would destroy multiple lives forever. As April 19th dawned, Montasia had no idea that her 2 weeks of relative peace were about to end in the most horrific way possible. She couldn't have known that Tillery had already made his choice, that he had decided if he couldn't have her, no one could. At 7 a.m. that Tuesday morning, as Littleton began to wake up to what seemed like another ordinary day, Tillery was already moving toward the apartment on Little Drive where Montasia felt safe with her mother. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim isn't during the relationship, it's after they've tried to leave. At 7 a.m. on Tuesday, April 19, 2022, the quiet morning calm of Little Drive off Ferguson Street in Littleton was shattered by the sound that every domestic violence victim fears most, their abuser at the door. Tillery had found Montasia at her mother's apartment, violating the no-contact order that was supposed to keep her safe. What transpired inside that apartment represents every mother's worst nightmare and every family's greatest fear. The exact details of how Tillery gained entry remain unclear, but what followed was a massacre that would leave one young mother dead and a family destroyed forever. Jamzia Arrington, Montasia's mother, found herself face-to-face with a man who had come to kill her daughter. In that moment, maternal instinct took over. Jamzia didn't hesitate. She threw herself between Tillery and Montasia, becoming a human shield in a desperate attempt to save her child's life. The gunshots that followed echoed through the apartment complex, sending neighbors scrambling for cover and reaching for their phones to call 911. But inside that apartment, a mother was fighting for her daughter's life with everything she had. Jamzia was shot in the hip during her heroic attempt to protect Montasia. According to Montasia's grandmother, Brenda Royster, her mother got shot trying to save Montasia. She pushed Montasia out of the way and told her to run. Even wounded, Jamzia continued fighting, continued trying to give her daughter a chance to escape. But Tillery wasn't finished. The violence that had started inside the apartment spilled outside, where more gunshots rang out. Montasia was shot multiple times, both inside and outside the building. Each bullet was a deliberate choice, a calculated decision to end the life of a young woman whose only crime was trying to protect herself and her child. The most heartbreaking detail of this entire tragedy is that little Jason, barely 1 year old, was present during the shooting. This innocent child witnessed the destruction of his family, the murder of his mother, and the wounding of his grandmother. Miraculously, Jason was physically unharmed, but the psychological trauma of that morning will follow him for the rest of his life. When police arrived at the scene, they found Montasia's lifeless body. The young woman who had begged the court for protection, who had moved in with her mother for safety, who had done everything right in trying to escape an abusive relationship, was dead at just 20 years old. Jamzia Arrington survived her gunshot wound and was later released from medical care, but she would carry the trauma of being unable to save her daughter forever. Brenda Royster's words capture the devastating reality of what Tillery had stolen. "This mama had a baby, she's got a little boy that will never know his mom." Those words hit like a punch to the gut. A 1-year-old boy would grow up without his mother's voice singing him to sleep, without her arms to comfort him when he was scared, without her guidance as he navigated life's challenges. Tillery hadn't just killed Montasia, he had orphaned his own son. After executing Montasia in cold blood, Tillery fled the scene like the coward he had always been. The man who could beat a woman's face beyond recognition and shoot an unarmed mother multiple times suddenly found his courage failing when it came time to face the consequences of his actions. Littleton Police Chief Philip Trevette immediately issued warrants for Tillery's arrest on multiple charges: felony murder, assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, firing into an occupied dwelling, and possession of a firearm by a felon. The severity of these charges reflected the calculated brutality of his attack on Montasia and Jamzia, but Tillery had vanished. triggering a multi-agency manhunt that would span 3 agonizing days. The United States Marshals Service Fugitive Task Force joined the search, recognizing that Tillery posed an ongoing threat to public safety. He was considered armed and extremely dangerous, a man who had already proven he was willing to kill to maintain control. For 72 hours, law enforcement followed leads and tips about Tillery's whereabouts. Every hour he remained free was another hour of terror for anyone who might cross his path. The community lived in fear, knowing that a murderer was on the loose, possibly planning his next act of violence. Tillery had fled to Raleigh, North Carolina, seeking refuge among friends and family who lived there. Perhaps he thought the distance would buy him time, or maybe he believed his connections could help him escape justice. He was wrong on both counts. On Friday, April 22, 2022, at approximately 4:30 p.m., the manhunt came to an end. The U.S. Marshals, working alongside the Raleigh Police Department tactical team, located Tillery and moved in for the arrest. There was no dramatic shootout, no final stand, just a pathetic man being dragged away to face the consequences of his actions. Following his capture, authorities conducted thorough searches at the residence where Tillery had been hiding, gathering additional evidence that would be used to build an airtight case against him.
Officials say they found Tillery in Raleigh after following several tips. The chief also tells me they found a weapon believed to be the same weapon Tillery used to fatally shoot the mother of his child. Tonight, a felon wanted for murder is no longer on the run. 22-year-old Jamzia Tillery shot and killed Montasia Arrington, the mother of his child, on Tuesday. Arrington's mother, Teresa Arrington, was also wounded trying to save her daughter. She was treated for non-life-threatening injuries. At some point, Tillery posted to Facebook apologizing to his son and the mother of his child for what he had done. Today, U.S. Marshals arrested Tillery thanks to tips from the Roanoke Police Department and the Halifax County Sheriff's Office.
He was initially booked into the Wake County Detention Center, where he would await trial for the murder of the mother of his child. The charges against Tillery painted a picture of premeditated violence, felony murder for Montasia's death, assault with a deadly weapon for shooting Teresa, firing into an occupied dwelling for the attack on the apartment, and possession of a firearm by a felon due to his previous convictions. Have you seen similar cases in your area where domestic violence escalated to murder? What resources are available in your community for victims trying to escape abusive relationships? Share your thoughts and local resources in the comments. Your information could help save someone's life. Justice had finally caught up with Jamzia Tillery, but it came too late for Montasia Arrington. The tragic outcome of this case is not the result of a single misstep, but rather a cascade of systemic failures that expose deep flaws in the justice system's handling of domestic violence. At the heart of what went wrong was the bond decision, which prioritized procedural norms and the presumption of innocence over the urgent need to protect a vulnerable victim. Despite clear evidence of escalating threats and a documented history of abuse, the court granted bond to the accused, underestimating the risk he posed. This decision was not made in a vacuum. It reflected a broader judicial culture that often fails to fully grasp the dynamics of domestic violence, where abusers can be most dangerous when they sense a loss of control. Impounding the flawed bond decision was a glaring lack of monitoring. Once released, the accused was subject to minimal oversight, with no meaningful mechanisms in place to ensure compliance with protective orders or to track his movements. The absence of electronic monitoring or regular check-ins meant that the victim was left exposed, relying on a piece of paper for protection against someone who had already demonstrated a willingness to ignore legal boundaries. This lack of proactive intervention is emblematic of a justice system that too often treats domestic violence as a private matter, rather than a public safety crisis. Inadequate protection for the victim was the final, fatal link in this chain of failures. Despite her repeated pleas for help and clear indications of imminent danger, the system's response was fragmented and insufficient. Law enforcement, courts, and social services operated in silos, with little coordination or urgency. The victim's voice was not only marginalized but in effect silenced by bureaucratic inertia and a lack of belief in the seriousness of her situation. This failure to believe and act decisively on behalf of victims is a recurring theme in domestic violence cases, with deadly consequences. This case is not an isolated incident, but a reflection of the broader domestic violence crisis that continues to claim lives across the country. Every year, thousands of victims are failed by the very institutions meant to protect them. The justice system's reliance on outdated procedures, insufficient risk assessment tools, and a lack of trauma-informed practices perpetuates a cycle where abusers are given the benefit of the doubt while victims are left to navigate danger alone. The statistics are sobering. Intimate partner violence accounts for a significant proportion of homicides, and the period immediately following separation is the most lethal for victims. Yet, systemic change has been slow, hampered by stigma, underfunding, and a persistent reluctance to challenge entrenched legal norms. To address these failures, the justice system must undergo fundamental changes. Risk assessment protocols need to be standardized and rigorously applied, ensuring that decisions about bond and release are informed by the realities of domestic violence. Courts should implement mandatory training for judges and prosecutors on the dynamics of abuse, and invest in technology such as electronic monitoring to enforce protective orders. Most importantly, there must be a cultural shift toward believing victims, taking their fears seriously, acting swiftly, and prioritizing their safety above procedural convenience. The thematic message emerging from this tragedy is clear. Believing victims is not just a moral imperative, but a matter of life and death. Judicial failures to recognize and respond to the warning signs of domestic violence have deadly consequences. The justice system must move beyond passive acknowledgement and embrace a proactive, victim-centered approach. Only then can we hope to prevent future tragedies and honor the lives lost to systemic neglect. Montasia Arrington was more than just a statistic in domestic violence records or a name in a police report. She was a young woman with dreams, aspirations, and an unwavering love for her son. At just 20 years old, she had already shown remarkable courage in seeking help, filing protective orders, and trying to build a safe life for herself and Jason. Her memory deserves to be honored not as a victim who failed to escape, but as a survivor who fought against impossible odds in a system that failed her. Montasia's story serves as an urgent reminder that domestic violence can happen to anyone, anywhere. The warning signs are often there: escalating control, threats, violations of boundaries, and a pattern of violence that intensifies over time. As a community, we must learn to recognize these signs and support victims without judgment. We must believe them when they tell us they're in danger, help them access resources, and advocate for systemic changes that prioritize their safety. Let Montasia's legacy be one of awareness and action. Let her story inspire us to demand better from our justice system, to support domestic violence organizations in our communities, and to never turn away when someone reaches out for help. Montasia Arrington was a daughter, a mother, and a young woman who deserved to live. Her life mattered, her dreams mattered, and her story matters. May she rest in peace, and may her memory drive us to protect others who find themselves in similar danger. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it to raise awareness about domestic violence, and subscribe for more true crime content that honors victims and seeks justice. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people who need to hear them.